Dave, thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to have all of you here. We're delighted and we're honored. We really are. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a real treat, and we're going to spend the next couple of days together. My hope with the Fireside Chat is kind of set the overall context around Dave's history, the history of Obert Tanner, and then just some highlight stories from the firm over the last almost nearly 100 years. And so what I like to do, Dave, is start with you, which I know you're uncomfortable with, so we'll just get that out on the table. But so what was it like? Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? What was kind of like?
What's your second question?
Where were you born?
So I was born right here in Salt Lake, and I did not grow up here. My parents moved out of state when I was a young child and raised mostly in California, the Sacramento area primarily, and met and married a Utah girl and found my way back.
Well, that was quick. Entire lifetime, just in two sentences. So let's back up a little bit. So I think your family had a lot of kids. Is that right?
Yes, I have 4 younger brothers and 4 younger sisters, so I'm the oldest of 9, and we had a great upbringing, as I'm sure most of us have, and loved it. Big families are great. My parents were fantastic parents, taught us a lot, great role models.
And you moved a couple of times, and your parents were teachers, right? Educators?
Yeah, my dad moved originally to southern Arizona, a little place called Bisbee, to, along with a couple of others, build out and start up a new junior college. And then he moved on to California, where he spent 40 years in the junior college system. That's why we were based near the state capitol in Sacramento most of that time. And my mom was a PE teacher, a junior high PE teacher for her whole career.
Yeah, that's great. And then how'd you make your first buck?
You know what I think? I think the demise of newspapers that we've seen, and actually they're not all gone. Somebody here has got Garrett's got a cool take, a reinvention of that. But I think my first job was newspaper boy. And you know what I think about that? Well, I think those are great jobs, because you think about it. How many of us did that? You know, see, look at that. So I think there's a study here at Harvard Business.
Would you say more than half? 60%?
Yeah.
Incredible.
There's got to be a Harvard Business Review case study here, because you think about it, as a kid, a 12-year-old kid with a paper route, you've got inventory, you've got a perishable product, you've got transportation issues, you've got to collect, you've got to sell new subscriptions. I mean, it's a pretty cool little business model.
And you have to land the newspaper on the porch.
On the porch, you got delivery, you know, I mean, yeah.
That's great. And then I'm going to throw a few things out. Onions, lettuce, taxi driver, paper routes, swimming pool construction, worm farmer.
Yeah, yeah.
What were you doing as a kid?
Well, in Salinas, that's the lettuce capital of the Central Valley, and I had buddies that were kids of Mexican migrant farm workers that would come up. This was been in the 70s, late 60s, and I got a job with them picking lettuce, bunching onions, paid pretty good. We had a neighbor that had a worm farm, and you got to get up in the night and go turn the lights on and make sure the worms aren't crawling out, and we did that for a while. and in college I drove a taxi. I don't know.
Pretty entrepreneurial.
Lots of things, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, I think there was something that kind of defined your entrepreneurial experience, and I have it in my pocket.
Uh-oh. Oh my gosh. You're kind of a sneaky guy. So this is a peephole, and I was home from college, where I had a kind of a basic college kid job, and I was missing all the basketball and football games because I always had to work. And a guy knocked on the door at my mom's home in Sacramento over the Christmas break, and said, "Why'd you open the door? You didn't know who was out here." And she said, "Well, you rang the bell." He goes, "Yeah, but I could have been a bad guy. I was watching this." And he said, for $58 I can install a peephole in your front door. And my mom said, "I've been wanting that. My husband hasn't got around to it." And he drilled a hole and he put this in, and it took him 1 or 2 minutes, and he took the check and he was gone. And I thought, went down to the hardware store, found out these cost $1.50 if you buy them in a gross. And I did that all through college at dorms and condominiums that were being built for student housing, and I went door to door. In fact, I went door to door back then in the neighborhood where we now live, and installed. So this was, in fact, I also did this for about 3 or 4 years after I came to work at O.C. Tanner on weekends because it paid pretty well.
And you paid for all your college selling
It
peepholes,
paid for all my
right?
college and my graduate school. Yep.
Could have been a worm farmer, but you decided to go for peepholes.
Yeah,
That was great.
Yeah.
So, so tell us a little bit about how it came to be that you joined O.C. Tanner.
Well, this is a story that's a little emotional for me because, you know, I finished MBA school down in Phoenix. I went to Thunderbird, and I had this wonderful, beautiful wife. We'd been married a couple of years, and we had a brand new baby just as I finished up. And I had a couple of job offers, but they were out of the country. It's an international MBA program. And Terry really wanted to come back to Utah. She was homesick. So we thought we'd give that a try. And I asked her dad, who was fairly well connected in town, to give me, you know, 3 or 4 names of people I could maybe talk to and get the lay of the land. I knew I wanted to be in business somewhere. And I did talk to 3 or 4, and I asked them, give me the name of 4 or 5 companies that if you were me, you'd zero in on. And this one was the only one on everybody's list at the time. I pursued some other things, but I really laser focused on O.C. Tanner. And they did have a couple of jobs posted that I thought I could do, and I applied. And we had just gone to open our first international location in Canada, in Toronto. And I thought I could sense an appetite for international growth, and that's what I wanted to do. And so I kind of zeroed in on it, and I had interview after interview after interview. You want the whole story?
I do. It's a good story.
And, you know, they weren't sure.
Was it like 16 interviews?
I did. I
Something
think I
nuts like
well over a dozen interviews with 3 or 4 different people. And the role was an entry-level marketing job, and the guy that was the VP there was Jack Wixom, just an absolutely phenomenal guy. I'm still in touch with Jack today, and I knew I could do that job. I wanted that job, and so many interviews. And on a Friday afternoon in Jack's office for yet another interview, I could tell he was not going to offer me a job. I could just tell he did not. He wasn't convinced, and I heard myself say this. It's not something I thought of in advance, and I think it was a little bit of desperation, maybe a little inspiration. But I said, Jack, listen, I know I can do this job well for you. I can tell you're not sure about me. I'm coming to work on Monday, and I'm going to work here, and I'll give you a couple of months for free. You don't have to pay me, and then you can send me away at any time, but you got to give me a chance. And I got up and left. He didn't say a word. He watched me get up and leave. And I came back on Monday, and he had a job offer for me. So, yeah. So there's lots of versions of that story floating around, but that's how it came down, and that was a big, big day for me.
That's great. I love that story. So pretty early in your career, you were noticed by the CEO, and it was related to some tax dynamics that were happening, I think, back in D.C.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit about that story?
Sure. So I started in 1983. In about 1985, the company, under the leadership of our then CEO, Don Osler, who is still on our board at age 91, just a fantastic energizer bunny kind of force in our company. He began working with our congressional delegation from Utah to influence tax legislation so that employee recognition awards could be tax-free to the employee and tax-deductible to the employer. That was eventually successful, but as that began, he needed someone to do a lot of research. This was pre-internet. This was go to the library, get the books, and figure it out. And he gave me this project, and I didn't know Don very well, but I was the research guy in marketing. And he gave me assignment after assignment after assignment, and he was dogged. He still is, by the way. And he was in search of certain answers to questions, and I thrived. I love that, and I love the exposure and the opportunity. But one day, he's a quiet man, and he he would show up at your desk without warning. You'd look up and there he'd be, he would just sort of, and that happened one afternoon, and he said to me, "How are you doing?" And I answered, "Well, I'm doing great. How are you?" And Don said, "Well, I'm glad you're doing great. I mean, how are you doing with the assignment I gave you?" Got it. That was a great, a lot of great learnings in that experience.
Really neat opportunity you had there.
He did care how I was doing, but he wanted the assignment done.
And then a little time after that, I guess, you ended up working with Jack on one of Jack's ideas, right?
Yeah, Jack was a brilliant guy. Jack had this idea. This is back in the day when our customers they'd have an army of people, clerical people, keeping track of all their employees. And when it came time to recognize them for 5 or 10 or 15 years of service, they did it at an annual banquet, usually at the end of the year. And they would gather up all the little 3x5 cards, and they would mail, not email, all the employees and give them their choice of 5 things to choose from, and package it all up and have an order form and mail it into us. And we would produce one big order and ship it to the banquet. And Jack's idea was, recognition is better done on the day or in the moment or right after the achievement. And he had this brilliant idea of taking advantage of technology. Nobody in our industry had done this before. Have the client send us a file. Back then it was a mag tape, reel-to-reel mag tape with all the employee data. And then we would communicate on their behalf without our name on it with each eligible employee a few weeks before their anniversary date. And we would secure their order, find out what they wanted engraved on the order, and know from the file who their manager was, and ship the award on time with some tips on how to present it. And it was revolutionary in our industry. And I had nothing to do with the idea, but Jack and others asked me to kind of become a sales engineer, go on the road and sell and present and implement this with major clients. And that was just like the opportunity of a lifetime, to get out in front of customers, work with our sales force. In our business, sales is just about everything. It all starts there. And that really was a
tremendous impact on the revenues of the company.
Oh, just took, every client wanted that, and we were the only ones that had it. And it took 5 or 7 years for competitors to catch up. So it was a big change in the organization. And it sort of was the beginning of a theme in terms of technology innovation in a company that was really classically, traditionally focused on manufacturing what we're good at, and then finding customers to sell it to.
And then what was the progression from there to becoming president and CEO of the company?
Well, I had a few other opportunities along the way. I was given opportunities to work in different areas of a business, and I learned a lot in our operations. I spent a lot of time with our sales force. I spent some time in our manufacturing, and eventually I became an operating leader over operations, and went from there.
And that was almost 20 years ago. You became president, right?
About 20 years ago.
Yeah, and then CEO a few years after.
CEO a few years after, 6 years after that. Yeah,
that's great. And so, 4th CEO of this company. There's been very few.
4th CEO, 95 years this year, celebrated in September.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I love it.
It is clear you love it.
I just absolutely love it.
Yeah, you love your job.
And I love that everyone here loves it. I want them to love it. And you guys love it. I know you do. I've talked to you. I can feel it. I mean, I can relate to that feeling. Yeah. And I got to tell you, I admire you. You're like the Oberts. I'm not. I didn't found this. I stumbled into it, and it's blessed me. But you guys are building something to last. And you walk in, you saw that picture out front of Obert and Grace Tanner. They just gave it their all. And they lived good lives, and they left behind this company as an unbelievable legacy for our community and for our employees and for their family, of course, as well. So good on you, all of you.
And good on you. Yeah, that's great. Great lead-in. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about Obert and the founding story of this company.
Obert, youngest of 10 or 11 children. He was his mother was the second or third wife of a polygamist family in early Utah. He grew up in Farmington, Utah, about 50 miles north of here, and very, very humble, wonderful mother influenced him greatly. And he, if you were to question him toward the end of his life, he would tell you he was a teacher and a philosopher and a thinker and a philanthropist and a businessman last. He loved freedom of thought and expression. He loved education. He really sought the opportunity to go to university. He had to figure out a way to pay for that. And he did. He got a job cleaning chimneys in the winter. And one of the homes that he cleaned was the home of a man that owned a jewelry store. And he parlayed his way into a job working in the jewelry store, thought it would be better pay, easier work. And there he learned how to make jewelry. And that catapulted him into wanting to make graduation pins and rings for high school graduates. And that moved on to something a little more promising, which was, and if you think about the time, the company founded in 1927, 2 or 3 years later, the Depression, Industrial Revolution, not far behind. He didn't like how workers were treated. He was a student, he was a philosopher, he was a learner, he observed, and he thought there ought to be a better way to communicate value and to treat people in the workplace. And that's kind of spawned this industry that we're in today, although it's really changed over the years. You'll see some of that a little bit later. And you know, it took a while. It was a startup. It was a bootstrap. There was no private equity. There was nobody, no angel investor. It was Obert. And he had 1 or 2 employees. He operated out of the basement of his mother's home. The basement of his mother's home is where Mindy Cox later, with her husband, lived while going to the University of Utah. You met Mindy last night, by circumstance. And, you know, I've got a file this thick of letters in my desk, and I read them sometimes in company meetings because they're really valuable for people to hear these stories. Obert was a professor at Stanford while he was running this business here, and while his nephew, who joined the business in about 1937, 10 years into it, still struggling to make it work, hawking wedding rings to get enough money to take a train back east to make a sale. You know, that's how it was. And but there are these letters back and forth between him and Pierce Labrum, his first employee, who was managing the shop of maybe 5 or 6 or 10 employees. And they go something like this. These are letters back and forth. Pierce to Obert. Have you heard about that one order from XYZ company? Is it going to come? Because I'm not sure how we're going to make payroll next week. We've only got $39 in the bank. And Obert would answer back and say, well, geez, let me think about it. I might be able to send you $10. See if you can ask Bill and Ed, who are single and don't have families, if they can wait a week for payroll, and we'll find a way to get by. You know, these are the kinds of conversations that I think maybe some of you who are 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, some of your predecessors had. I don't know, but those are pretty inspiring to me. World War II hit, and Norman, who was Obert's nephew, 10 years younger than Norman, but his nephew from an older brother, went off to war. He was a fighter. He was a pilot in the European theater, and it was a tough time. You know, companies hunkered down. There were shortages of raw materials. Obert was still struggling to keep the business going. He was also pursuing his academic life, which, by the way, has shown up in this company. Now, there's a real core intellectual property focus in this business, and we'll share some of that with you too. But that came from Obert's focus on philosophy and the worth of the individual, and it just found its way in, and it's really critical. But that was a tough time.
Yeah.
That was a difficult time.
And then at some point, I think before World War II, Norman went and visited one of their competitors. Right?
Yeah, he was on a trip back east, a sales trip. Norman was a salesperson. I mean, that guy was so charismatic and so good with customers and prospects, and he was just a phenomenal, energetic sales guy. Obert was more of the builder and the improvement and the run the factory more efficiently and have the big vision that Norman could sell. And he was back on a sales trip. And while there, I don't know how it happened. I think one of the clients, one of the prospects he was calling on was doing business with a competitor, and got wind of it. And this was back in Rhode Island. And the competitor called him in, and it was a company called LG Balfour. Some of you might have a Balfour class ring or something, or have heard that name. They've since sold off in a few things and don't exist, but darn it, don't you hate that one? But he offered Norman, I think it was $1 million to buy the company. And Norman accepted some kind of he brought back a check and a letter of agreement, and he was so excited. I mean, this was like jackpot, right? And Norman wasn't the owner, but he was a partner, and he was a good guy, and Obert was having none of it. He was having none of that. He was thinking much longer term, and Norman talked to him and said, "Norman, this is like life-changing for both of us." And Obert would have none of it and send it back. I think it actually went to court because Mr. Balfour thought he had a deal, and he didn't. And Obert prevailed, and that was one of the early indications that he was building something to last.
Yeah, and that would have been a lot of money back.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
For a couple of kids from Farmington.
And then Norman and Obert survived this, right? Their relationship.
Yes, they did. Norman and his wife Barbara, they lived to be 103 and 101. And they've just been fantastic. There's a portrait of them up here in the Norman Tanner Client Conference Center above just out here. And other than Obert, I'm not sure anyone did as much for this company as Norman. And he stayed on the board into his 80s. The families are both still involved. One is 2/3 owner. That's the Obert family. The Norman is 1/3, and they get along great. We have members of both families on the board. We couldn't have better shareholders. We couldn't have a better situation that way.
That's terrific. So I'd like to just throw out a series of questions on a set of different topics. I think they just kind of bring out some of the important stories of O.C. Tanner, as well as kind of how the Evergreen 7Ps come to life here. So if it's okay with you, they're not all perfectly lined up together, but I think they'll make sense as we get through them. So your organization supports other organizations being people first. That's a very important part of what you do. It started with that early recognition by Obert that we need to celebrate the contributions of human beings in a very industrial period, right, where people are being treated more like factory workers and cogs in a wheel.
Exactly. Yep.
But I'd be curious, how do you think about people first? Given your experience here, your experience with all of your clients, what does it mean to you?
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. In my reading of the history of the company, there's a story that Obert tells about, and I bet you guys can relate to this, many of you, as founders, with a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight on your shoulders. He'd pull into the parking lot, and he'd see then a couple hundred cars. And I think this was in the 60s, 70s, in that time frame. And the company was successful, it was doing well, it was growing, and he saw 200 or 300 cars in the parking lot as he came in the morning, and he felt the heavy weight of that. He felt, look at all these people, look at these cars, look at these car payments, house payments, food on the table, kids to get to college, and wow, it's heavy. They depend on me. I've got to make good decisions every day. I mean, these people depend on me. And it was heavy. I mean, I can tell reading it that it weighed on him. And of course, he measured up to it. But there's a part of that story that makes me feel a little, maybe almost a little guilty. But I see it differently. Like, you know, when I pull in the parking lot and I see now 1,200 cars, and I think of all those people and all that they've got going on in their lives, my first thought isn't, boy, they depend on me. My first thought is, man, I'm glad they came to work today. I need them. I depend on them. We as an executive team, we don't get anything done around here without all these fantastic people. I love these people. I know most of them by name. I want to know them all. I want to be connected to them. I'm thankful for them. I know the difference they're making in the cultures of the companies we serve, and I know they're connected, and they believe in our purpose, and they make us who we are. I mean, I think that's what drives me in the way I think about people. And I've talked with some of you about these things, and I know you feel the same way. I mean, what else is there, really? I've got another thought on that, which is, you know, families. You know, we're all families. We've all got families. And if you think about those 7 Ps, people first, private, perseverance, you know, long term. I don't know. I mean, 7 Ps of an evergreen company. How about 7 Ps of an evergreen family? I mean, I just think there's some similarities there that we probably can see in our family lives that bleeds into our work lives. I feel that way. I think it's a privilege to be part of an organization that's especially leading one that is all about people. I really do.
That's terrific. Now, we haven't done a tour yet, but you're going to see something really interesting. And I've never seen this before in any work environment I've been in. But your manufacturing is integrated into your office space. It's not in another building. There's not a manufacturing building. It's integrated. And to me, that's a very interesting statement about people first. But tell us about that.
Well, I've learned all these lessons here. I'm a product of this company. I didn't, Obert wanted, he wanted a beautiful environment. He wanted it to be beautiful outside and inside. He believed big time in beauty and kindness. Those were his watchwords. Beauty and kindness. Beauty in the awards we make, beauty in the surroundings, treating people kindly, with dignity, fairly. And so he didn't like the idea of a separate. He wanted everybody to know each other and to work. He wanted the same carpet in his office to be in the factory. Literally, we had carpet in the factory with big presses leaking oil all over it. He didn't care. He replaced the carpet. He wanted that kind of an environment for all of the people. We have lunch together. We have our own in-house restaurant with an executive chef. It's fantastic. But we don't have an executive dining room or a separate menu. We just don't do that. And we have glass walls in our offices. So it's very transparent. These were all things that came from Obert's vision of how he wanted us to work together and treat each other. So
that's great.
Yeah.
And then Obert, I guess a pretty common phrase around here that came from Obert, let's get a little better every day, or something like that. Yeah.
Obert said that all the time. Long before the term continuous improvement was common, he was, and you asked me that question, and I've thought about it since, Dave, and I think I can't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure if you think about it, if you're building something to last, and Obert was very intentional. He was building something to last. And we'll tell you more about that in a subsequent session today, but if you're building something to last, And what are you going to do every day? You know, he was always here, going around the factory. Even into his 80s, he was here every day looking for things that could be improved. And he talked a lot about that in all hands meetings. We got to get a little better every day. Find a couple of problems every day to solve. And I think it goes hand in hand. I think it travels with building something to last. Because think about it, if you get a little better every day, and look, sometimes you have to get a whole lot better really quick, right? Because something happens. But if you get a little better every day, over to the long haul, you're going to get pretty good. And you're going to build into the organization that expectation that we're never there. We got to get a little better every day. We got to find something new to do a little bit better. And there's always something that you can do better, right?
Yeah. And to your point about something bigger, I guess it was Todd Skinner came and had a real impact.
Yeah. Well, in the mid-90s, with Y2K looming, which was going to be the end of the world, right? And our compilation of in-house proprietary technology systems that were industry leading, but ready to be upgraded and changed, in need of change. We embarked on a big, massive IT project. We called it Cornerstone. It was going to change every process in the company, every job, every way we did everything. And while we're driving the car down the road. And we ended up moving on to SAP for our back office, and we adopted an outfit out of Austin, Texas called Trilogy, which was the brand new darling for how you configure your new car online. And we were going to use that for our customers to configure their award products and so forth. And our CEO, then CEO Kent Murdoch, had a great idea, and he brought in a speaker to help us and to motivate us, because this project was so daunting and so massive, and we were having a hard time seeing what it looked like and how we would do it. It was so massive. And Todd Skinner was what is called a first ascensionist. Any of you heard of Todd Skinner? Or of a first ascensionist? That's someone who climbs a mountain or a peak or something that's never been climbed before by anyone, ever. And he did that, and then he spoke about it. And he came and he spoke to us about climbing Trango Tower. Look that up. It's the sheer, I don't know how many thousand feet in Pakistan, and there's a reason it had never been climbed. You know, it's not climbable. And he prepared his small team. They got there on site. Their goal was to climb it. This is how he tells the story. They walked around it, and they climbed up a little ways over here and climbed up a little ways over there and got back down and tried something else. And they spent 3 weeks resorting their gear, acclimating, looking up, trying to imagine where the crevices and the footholds and handholds would be, and what's the best way, and where should we start. And they made no progress for 3 weeks. I'm giving you the very short version of his story. And they finally decided the only way we're ever going to climb this is to get on the wall. We will find our way once we're on the wall. And they did. They got on the wall, and they found their way, and it was not what they could have envisioned, but they did it. And so that became, and still is today, a phrase we use. Got to get on the wall. We can't just keep talking about this. We can't keep meeting about it. We got to get on the wall. We'll make some mistakes. We'll figure it out. But we've got to get on the wall if we're going to get to the top. So that was a really great moment in our company. We held the event down at the local community college. We didn't have this auditorium at the time. And we had 2,000 some odd employees. And Todd rappelled down from one of the balconies. And Kent Murdoch, our CEO, rappelled down. We thought that was crazy. He could get hurt, you know, but it was a great moment. And get on the wall is a phrase, and it means a lot in the company. Even for people that weren't here, and most today weren't here then, we tell that story. Scott, we should tell that more often, shouldn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, that bias to action is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And you make mistakes too, right?
You make mistakes. You start over, you back up.
That's great. So I think most people think of optimism as kind of a natural personality trait. You disagree. You think it's a learned skill.
Well, I don't know. You know, like, I don't know what you think. Optimism, like, can you be in business and be a pessimist? I don't think you're going to last long. I mean, can you be an entrepreneur? Can you be a founder and be a pessimist? I don't think so. But you know, I do. I think optimism is it can be and is a personal characteristic or attribute. But I think it's a skill that can be built into a company. You know, we're going to succeed. We're going to figure this out. We're going to solve that problem. If it's not this, it's going to be that. And I also think optimism goes really well with the long run, with perseverance, with being built to last. I think it goes really well with paced growth. I just think if you're optimistic and you have it comes with energy, it comes with confidence, and companies need that. I think cultures need that. And I think it comes from the leader, especially the founder, or the second or third or fourth gen, whatever you all are. And I'd maybe suggest that if you haven't thought about that, you might a little bit. You know, how do you build optimism into your culture? How do you make it a skill in the company?
Any particular hints or strategy how you might think about that?
Well, you know what? As you make progress, you know, we all have initiatives and priorities that we're pursuing. And as you make progress and you achieve some of those, I think you ought to pause and celebrate them. I think you can't do that enough. You can't get your people together often enough. I'll give you an example. We have, and you do too, I'm sure. We have recognition moments around here all the time. A team or an individual is being highlighted, and often, not unusual, for there to be 100 people gathered around for an hour or 40 minutes or 30 minutes to really acknowledge Bob. And we had a visitor, and you know, I paused over the railing to let them see this and experience this. I thought this would be a good way for them to kind of feel the company a little bit. And he said to me, how often do you do that? And I said, it probably happens several times a day. You know, it's not always 100 people. Sometimes it's more. Often it's fewer, but it happens a lot. You got 100 people there for 40 minutes doing nothing. And then that hits your productivity? And I thought, I think it's the most valuable, productive time of the day. I don't think there's anything I'd rather they be doing. You think about that. You've got an individual or a team being acknowledged, but you've also got people hearing what they say about each other. You've got new people feeling what this company's like, what this culture's like, recognizing that they're going to be appreciated, encouraged, inspired. I think those kinds of things, more maybe than anything else, you know, I bet you're all thinking about how you do these things in your organizations. I'm sure we can learn a lot from you. But I think that breeds confidence, optimism, energy, all the things you want in a vibrant, you know, workplace culture. That's probably the number one thing I'd suggest you think about.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Optimism.
So I think we're in an interesting time right now that a lot of leaders are struggling with strategy. There's a lot of uncertainty. Things are changing pretty quickly. You know, maybe, I don't know, maybe in some stable industries a couple of decades ago, you could do a 10-year plan and kind of just march against that plan, or maybe even a 5-year plan and march against that plan. But I'd be curious, how do you think about strategy?
Well, I think we've made mistakes about that, and I think we've learned from them over the years. You know, if you figure out a 5 or a 10-year plan, I don't know how you do that anymore. Things happen so fast, but even then, when you thought you could do that, if you adhere to it too rigidly, I think you're going to miss something. We've developed a sort of a rhythm or a cadence, and it's just always ongoing. And you know, our executive team is very, very much involved in this. We are very much a consensus leadership team. I've got a 10-person executive team. I wouldn't trade one of them for anything. I never want a smaller team. And they're just phenomenal. But we're always in some part of this annual cadence of strategy, and it starts really with a lot of listening. We have our annual sales convention with our salespeople in February, late January, February. We listen to them. What are they seeing in the market? What are they sensing? They're really valuable and important to us. In March or April, I take our executive team off-site for 2 or 3 days, and we zero in on 2 or 3 topics. Hopefully just 2, and sometimes just 1. And we just zero in on it. We dive deep. We just beat it to death. We just surround it. We gang up on it. We just work it. And with the idea that we know there's something here that has got to be a priority. And maybe there's 2 or 3, but no more. We come out of that with a real strong sense. And then we start talking to people in the organization. We don't keep that meeting a secret. We start talking to people. We sound it out. We listen. We try to get some other perspectives. I mean, there's 1,200 people here. We're trying to, and then about August, we have our big strategic planning event. It's 3 or 4 days. We bring in all of our vice presidents. There's 40 of them around the world. And we bring them in here, and we have a day where we assess how well we did last year. What's our progress? How well are we doing on our last year's strategic priorities and initiatives? And we kind of give ourselves a letter grade, and we see where we're not hitting it and where we are, and we hold ourselves accountable. And then we have another day or 2 where we divide up into maybe 5 or 6 breakout teams, and we give each team a topic that came from our executive team meeting back in March, April. And we have a little fun with this. We have a little competition. We challenge people to think big. Don't let budgets get in the way. Don't let timing get in the way. Think big. Come back. And then each team presents after about 5 or 6 hours of time together. And we have some fun with that. And we listen to each other. Sometimes all 5 teams will have the same topic. Usually there's 2 or 3 topics, and we divide them up. And boy, it's so good. It is so rich what comes out of that. And we just did it in August. My colleague Scott Sperry sitting here, he conducted this year, did a great job. And we've already got some sense for where we're going to go next. So that's in August. September, we have a board meeting. We give the board a little preliminary peek into it. And then right now, in October, November, we are developing that strategy and those priorities. We build them into the budget and the financial plan. We take it to the board in December. And then we're off to the races in January. And we put it all together on something called a strategy map, 1 page. And we cascade that through town halls throughout the company. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later today too, but that's a great, great tool for us here. And then a month or 2 later, it's March. And we're having another executive retreat. And we're thinking about the next year, and sort of that cadence just kind of continues. And I'm sure you do things your way, but that has really worked for us.
It's just a continuous strategic process year-round.
Our business is changing so fast and so often, we can't plan it out further than that. I think it would be crazy. We're always trying to, you do it, peer around the corner. What's over there? What's coming? What do customers need? Where do we need to, fine-tune our strategy? And it just never ends.
So maybe this kind of ties into my next question, which is kind of, how do you think about growth? What's your philosophy around growth, and what's healthy growth?
We used to have some wrestles with that question. We are not a company that is averse to change or that doesn't understand the need for growth. But I can't say that's always been the case. We were so successful for so long doing things pretty much the same way that when we started to try to make changes, there were voices that said, the good old days, Obert wouldn't do wait a minute, what's that going to mean for me? It means everything's changing is what it means. And, we're way beyond that now. But, we had to get through it and go through it. And growth is not an option. It's imperative. That was one of the questions we got maybe 20, 25 years ago. Why do we have to grow? Everything's fine. Well, no, we have to grow. We've got to invest in our future. We've got an ambition to accomplish more, do more, be more. So growth is not really an option. It's just required. And if you're not growing, I think that what that means is your customers aren't hiring you anymore, and that's not great, right? I mean, that's not great. If you are growing, you're being hired, and you're relevant, and you're needed. And the other big thing about growth, obviously, is it brings energy into the company. It brings optimism and opportunity. Right. Like people, they want opportunity, and we want them to have opportunity. People first. You want them to have some opportunity. If you don't, you're gonna lose some of them. Probably the best ones.
And do you have like a kind of a core pacing metric around growth? Profits, economic profits, revenues, customers served?
We have a compensation component for all of our employees, exempt, non-exempt. We call it variable compensation plan. A percent of your comp is variable, and it's based on achieving operating goals. Sales is a big one. Financial, compliance and accountability is a big one. Personal performance is a big one. Those are all part of it. Others as well. From time to time, we'll add something new. But growth is a big one. It's the biggest one, and it makes everything else possible. We build that in a little different way, though. We build it so it's got to fall short, and it meets, and it exceeds. That are multipliers for the bonus or for the variable comp portion. And it's really variable comp. The bonus is if we go above meets. That would be the bonus. The variable we expect to pay. And it helps us to build alignment in the organization. And if we fall short, it'll pay a little less. Seldom does it do that. This system works for us. If we meet the targets we're meeting are what we expect. So we don't set a meets target that is 20% growth. We set a target that is a stretch, but not too much of a stretch. It's what we expect to have happen. And then people understand that if we beat that, there's more. And there's also a financial factor that applies, so it can even be more than that. So we can show that to you and share that with you, but you've probably all got something like that. But that's kind of how we communicate the imperative of growth throughout the company.
That's great. Thank you. So I think something I'm pretty curious about. So the company was largely a manufacturing company, and kind of a beautiful manufacturing company, right? Today, I think the vast majority of your revenues now come from software and software-related support and services. That's a pretty dramatic transition. I know we're going to go into more details of this in the next session, but if you were a manufacturer with ambition to move into software, what guidance would you give that CEO and their team?
I'd say get on the wall. Go do it. We used to have in the basement of this building our warehouse where we bought product from manufacturers and stored it, and then we customized it and shipped it out as an award. We customized it with something we make, something symbolic that we make that goes with it. And, there was a big disruption to that because the basement was only so big. And so we built a building on the campus that's a distribution center. You'll see that. We built that in 95. It was desperately needed. 1995, just when we won our first big tech client. Happened to be a little company called Apple, and they wanted us to have an online brochure instead of a 4-color print brochure that displayed the products that people could choose as awards. And we did that. It moved us into that world. And almost as soon as that building was finished, within 5 or 6 years, all of a sudden people are actually beginning to think about shopping online. And, these were still pre-Amazon days. But that's changed our world. That's been quite a significant change. All of that digital, revolution, all of the digital change that's happened throughout every industry. And gosh, in our business, we've not always been fast enough to take advantage of it. There have been some times when a competitor has gotten somewhere first. We don't like that. And there's been one time I can remember where a competitor innovated something before we did, and we kind of poo-pooed it. We kind of thought, that's never gonna, took off like crazy. No, big lesson, big miss, big failure. Were we a little cocky, a little arrogant, a little complacent? Maybe. We aren't anymore. I mean, you learn one of those lessons painfully, you learn it well. So I think I would be surprised if there's an industry or a business where technology, I don't think of it as something you have to do. I think of it as something you leverage, something that can...
It's a tool. It's an
make
enabler,
you
right?
better, right?
Right. But I guess my question would be is it a kind of a key hire you brought in that kind of brought your software capabilities, or was it you just over a period of years got better and better every day at doing software?
We learned back at that experience with that ordering system, the power of deploying technology.
Yeah.
And then we learned through that cornerstone, get on the wall experience,
Yep.
the leap you can make. And I think that's in us. But we've also been on like our third round of competitors since I've been here. Change happens in an industry, and some don't make the turn, they're gone. And another change, and we're on our third round, but our third round is every bit as tough and competitive as any of the other rounds were, and they were tough too. But maybe 10, 15 years ago, our industry became a hotbed for HR tech. A lot of startups. That's an old industry. It's been done the same way for a long time. Let's go disrupt it. Clayton Christensen, all the disruption stuff hit our industry. And so sometimes that'll prompt you to move.
Yeah.
You're better off getting ahead of it, right?
You make it sound very easy, just so you know.
Oh, it's not. It's been hard.
Okay.
It's been really hard.
Okay.
And we've had a lot of fits and starts, and projects take us longer than we think they should, and they're expensive, and finding the talent and keeping it is not easy. We've got Silicon Slopes just down the road here in Utah County, and we got a lot of tech going on here and a lot of talent competition for software engineering and architects, and it's a really vibrant area. I've talked to Don about this, he knows, but it's, So we're a Silicon Slopes company. I think we're probably the only 95-year-old startup in that group.
Yeah.
And you got to, we'd be nowhere without it.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
So talk about what you see as your sources of competitive advantage of being an Evergreen company. Do you see one or more?
Oh, yeah, I see a lot more. Even some of our newer competitors, their long-term view is some kind of a liquidity event.
Yeah.
We know that because one or two of them every 2 or 3 years make a run at well, some of them have been purchased by private equity. Some of them are making a run at an IPO every now and then and not quite getting there. They will at some point. But, one of the things Obert Tanner did with this company is he put it into a trust. It cannot be sold, cannot be acquired. We get those calls all the time, like I'm sure you do, all the time. And we don't think about it. We're in it for the long term. That's what was intended. That's what's required. And that gives us some really good advantages. If you know you're in it for long term, you can invest for the long term. If you know you're in it for the long term, you don't have to answer to short-term results. You can plan. You can. You've got a longer runway. If you've got shareholders that are on board with that, which we do, that's fantastic. They expect that. They want the same thing. You're all in sync. I think people who join a company like that can see a long-term future in it. They want that. They want long-term stability and opportunity. They want to grow with that kind of a company. I think customers look at that, and many times they're looking for, they want to see our financials. They want to see our competitors' financials. They want to know if we're going to be around for the duration of a 3 or a 5 year contract or longer. You know, one of our clients is Chevron, big company, great company. They've been our client for 45 years, Scott? 40 plus years. They go out, they go out to bid every 3 or 4 years. They renew contracts. They hold us accountable, but they're loyal to us, and vice versa. We have a lot of that. I think a lot of that has to do with, sort of a long-term view.
Well, I thought it was interesting when we had lunch with your team a while back,
Yeah.
and I was kind of pushing on how do you think about return on investment? And the answer, if I remember correctly, was don't get caught up in the details of the numbers. We're really focused on where we think things are going in the future, and we're investing towards those. And we'll get it right sometimes, we'll get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But our owners aren't asking for us for a financial analysis to justify an investment that you're making, even a very significant reinvestment you're making.
Yeah. Customers sometimes ask us that. What's the return on investment if I follow your advice with all this corporate culture stuff you're talking about? And salespeople kind of have to hold me back and muzzle me, because I want to say, really? You're leading this organization and you're asking for a return on investment for treating your people right? You want a return on investment for saying thank you and for acknowledging great work and encourage. Didn't your mom teach you how to say thank you? That's not great sales language. They don't let me. But I do think that. I think, there's lots of ways to look at ROI, and we do a lot of work in our institute to help our clients understand the return on the investment. And that's been something that's been important. But in terms of our shareholders, I think they more likely would hold us accountable for achieving the vision that Obert had. They believe it. They want it. They are also, we don't have selfish shareholders, but they are also part of the success of the company. And they're owners, and they don't like that word. They really don't like that word, but they are owners, and we do treat them as such, and we treat them well, and they share in the success, and it's good. It's really good.
That's great. You just have a really high alignment, it feels like.
We do have when we declare a special dividend, which is not unusual, we do quarterly dividends, and usually in December, at the end of the year, we look, and if we have cash accumulation, we don't have needs for it in the immediate future for an acquisition or for this or that, we'll declare a special dividend, and sometimes they're quite significant. And our shareholders, almost, I wouldn't even say almost, every time, one of them will say, boy, that's a big number. Are you sure? What are you doing for the employees? And we have this thing called the shareholder bonus that is sometimes declared by our shareholders. It's paid out to all of our employees. It is not a small number. And it's a gift. It's not comp. And it's understood that it's not something you can count on, not something you better think about, not something you earned. It's a gift from the shareholders. I'm telling you, these things are so valuable as part of our workplace culture. They're just so valuable.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Closing question. How do you recharge and kind of make sure that you're in a good place through these turbulent times so you can be an effective leader?
Well, you know what? I love work. I love working. I love my team. My best friends are here. I mean it. I've lost touch with high school buddies. My best friends are the people I work with every day, and I want to spend time with them all the time, and probably more than they want to spend with me. But don't you find that true? Don't you just love the people you work with? Don't you have great relationship with your colleagues? I do, and I love it. And but they have families, and I have family, and I've got this wonderful wife, and we've got 4 kids and 13 grandkids, and You know, we're pretty good about the 7 Ps in our family, except for that one, paced growth. we had a dinner.
Going exponential.
Yeah, we had a dinner 6.5, 7 years ago with our family and just the kids and their spouses, and one of them tapped to get attention, tapped the glass and said, "Hey, we have an announcement. We're expecting in March." Wow, that's awesome. Wow, cool, congrats. Next one, tap, tap, tap. We have an announcement. We're expecting in March. Third one, tap, tap. We have an announcement. We're expecting in March. That one had twins.
Oh my gosh.
The oldest daughter said, tap, tap, tap. We have no announcement. We are done. But we have these 4 6-year-olds, these little bandits, and they are absolutely a thrill amongst the others. And I love that. We just have a great time. And I know you do too. I know family's important. I think family's uniquely important in this audience for obvious reasons. And that's where I'd rather be if I had my brothers.
Yeah, that's fantastic. David, thank you. Thanks for the time. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Thanks, David.
Really enjoyed this time together.
Thank you. Thank you.